jump in and have some meaningful conversation, at least start so on our agenda items. Again, thank everybody for joining in this morning. Appreciate staff and the rest of the team who helps to make all of this work and run. These days, folks in the city have been worked hard. So again, we appreciate your diligence and work on this side for sure. First item we have on the agenda discussion, a potential resource spreadsheet that was sent to us in our documents for the meeting. And so take some time here, just kind of walk through the funding piece questions here that kind of prompt us to ask some questions on who do we need to add, who are the stakeholders, and then kind of the follow-up and engagement, who will actually contact and do the engagement. First, before we jump into that, Marla, I actually want to kind of contextualize the request, because as I was thinking about it, and I don't know if other people had the same thought, and I remember our discussion on it, but when we think about funders, how much of this is conversation around funding for kind of the operational side of what we kind of moved to and saying that we need another entity owning this work, and how much of this is actually funding work that actually helps facilitate the creation of the housing itself? Or are we talking about both and?
Based on how I'm reading the notes from the meeting, we were looking at both, those who could help us get the work underway, the process of developing the plan, and then who might be participants and partners in implementation. Got it.
Cool. All right. So with that kind of setting the baseline for us in the conversation here, I think a really good set here of some different groups, entities here to walk through. And what I would suggest is we kind of run through this list and then kind of throw out the remark on what we think on this list of folks to that sense. So do we think these folks can help support kind of an operational requests for the entity, or are we thinking that these folks could make an investment in the housing, or do we look at these for both of the acts, so that if we're asking someone to go and make an ask, we kind of understand which area we're asking them to come into? Does that sound like a good way to run through that and then see if we need to add folks to that list?
Yeah, Dora, let me ask a question first. When we're talking about support for operational, it seems to me there's two subparts of that. One is what support do we need in order to create the plan? That part of the operation is creating the plan. And then the other part of the operation is having an organization that is kind of pushing the agenda through, kind of like Housing New Orleans. So it could be that the asks and the needs are different for both of those.
Yeah, agreed. So we walk through that with that understanding that maybe we could be very specific in that, because I think one is that short-term request in terms of trying to helping us get the plan together, and then the other one is more the long-term movement. So yeah, okay, cool. All right, first one up on the list is United Way, and thoughts on United Way. They do have, for folks who may know, they do have kind of their housing area within their operation in terms of one of the focuses, but thoughts on what that kind of request could be to United Way.
And let me just add too, you'll see on the list there are some asterisks, and that is because that item was listed on multiple lists that folks submitted. So like Ryan submitted some names, Joe submitted some names, and so where the names ended up on both or came from both lists, we just noted those with an asterisk. So you'll know that they were mentioned by multiple people.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for the United Way, I don't know what role they would play from either perspective. I didn't have them on my list, and maybe Ryan had some ideas about what the United Way might be able to do from a help perspective, period. I don't know what that would be, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they're going to have any, or the extent to which there may be some shift in some of their housing focused work, since they're about to have a change in leadership. And so I don't know what that might look like. I mean, obviously that's a good, something we would need to discuss. You know,
maybe
going
Ryan,
forward.
I don't know if Ryan's on the board or not. Maybe he knows of what the United Way is either planning or has on the drawing board from a housing or housing support perspective. I would see that organization as more of an advocate as opposed to a funder or an investor. Definitely wouldn't see them as an investor, but more as an advocate, not even funding the planning work. But I could be very wrong. I haven't been close to anyone over there for quite a while, so I don't know.
Only thing I'll bring up there to add maybe as a question though is I heard, and I hadn't had a chance, I said I was gonna call Cindy to ask her directly. I heard through the grapevine, the grapevine can get you messed up, that they had actually made a commitment to a development in the area in terms of being able to support some affordable units. That came from someone in the development community who made that commentary to me. And so I said I was going to follow up with Cindy just to see whether or not that was in fact true. But if that is true, that's a very much departure from historical kind of funding and support kind of things. But I would want to dig deeper in that commentary that I got. So
Yeah, definitely. I knew that they were looking to move their offices to the new development that was going to be taking place off of 5th Street, but this is the first I've also heard about housing itself.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess for United Way, there are a couple questions there around advocacy, and then we want to get some more information around what they may be engaged in right now. Other is from foundation side. We got Winston-Salem Foundation. Thoughts here on Winston-Salem Foundation?
Well, they could definitely help with planning. I doubt if they would be an investment. I mean, as far as participating in hiring consultants and developing housing planning.
Yeah, I would think that would make sense to make that ask of them in that area.
Yeah, agreed. All right. KBR?
Be the same thing, in my estimation. I don't, let me go back because yours, Duran, and Marla's conversation about, this two-prong approach as far as this list of names that might be able to help with putting the plan together or doing some operational contributions versus long-term housing investment. I don't see any of the foundations being in the second part of that scenario. So and frankly, I don't know what we mean by long-term housing investment. That might help me. And as we go, even after we get beyond the foundation, to, at least in my estimation, this, suggest whether this particular entity would be interested in doing long-term investing as opposed to, just doing support to get housing plans developed. And when you say initiated, I mean, that would be still, hopefully contributing to have someone on the ground helping to put the plan in action. But I don't see that as investing in hard structure assets, is what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Yeah. Other piece that may muddy the water a bit here, and I know it's not something that is out there yet, but I think some of these folks, including United Way, whom we mentioned before, if in fact there is a, and this is one of my hopes, if the council decides they want to do a housing bond referendum of some sort, I think foundations could play a role in resources around advocating on that, because oftentimes with the bond referendums in the past, private money is used to market that, put it out to the public, help public understand its importance. Because if I'm not mistaken, there is some prohibition from the city using its own resources to advocate or market the bond referendum itself. So would make some note that I think that if in fact that does happen, foundations, I think that's a big place we may want to try to tap into them in some place to that.
That would be an appropriate expectation.
Yeah. And I think that's where the chamber could come in too, is advocating.
Yeah, good point.
As a bond issue.
Yeah.
I think we lumped the foundations for a whole in that one. I think, Joe, I think you characterized them pretty well, unless someone has a different thought. Okay. To the chamber's point, I think you're right there, Paul, as well. Any other thoughts from the chamber in terms of their particular role? I would only think there wonder if it would be as much of the chamber itself, but some of the chamber members access to those folks. When you think about some of the folks here, your Wells Fargo, Truist, Bank of America, Duke Energy's folks, they're at that chamber table as well. So I think there's some influence roles that the chamber help in facilitating conversation.
I think that's a real good point, that not only could the chamber help in advocating for the passage of a bond issue, but yeah, you're right. The people that are at the table, the chamber could be influential in advocating for investors who are sitting around the table to kind of be part of this. So yeah, that would be a very strategic role that they could play.
Yeah, and in particular here, as folks are shifting the way we talk about housing access and affordability around it being a economic development issue now, that I think that it is not just a place where you have community advocates concerned about it, but the chamber needs to be concerned about accessible housing for everyone, because it impacts economic development now.
Yep.
Also, I'm wondering at the chamber level, when you think about, like, currently we have money set aside in the bond budget for an employer assisted housing program. That could be another place where they could really bring some value to the table as we're creating the plan, is understanding which of their members might find value in a program like that, and how we might collaborate to create one. Because we put a little bit of money in the budget to kind of start with a pilot to see how it would work. And then, if it's successful, then expand it. So they could be another audience for that conversation. Because right now we've just been talking with Novant and then Atrium Wake Forest. Well, at least that's how we were prior to COVID. So that'd be another place for them.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great point. Yeah.
Other thoughts from the chamber perspective? Okay, moving on. Business Alliance, is that just things that thinking about the Winston-Salem Alliance?
I don't know who. I didn't have that one on my list, so I don't know.
That was on Ryan's list.
So he's probably Mr. Turner's one, which the mayor serves as the president of the alliance. Is that what they're referencing? And if that is, then I put them in a similar place as a chamber in terms of the fact of who sits at that table. All of the folks that every other entity from below there has some seat at that table, from Novant, Atrium, Wake City, Forest County, Wells, Truist, all those folks. I'm not sure about Bank of America on that, but vast majority of the rest of folks on that list has some participation in the Winston-Salem Alliance. And I would suggest that since the mayor does serve as the president of the alliance, and much of their core focus is around economic development, it comes back to that same question around housing being an economic development issue, and thus how that centers into their focus of work. had thoughts about the alliance.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, okay. All right, Novant Health.
Yeah, I had them down as well as Atrium. And it's more from again, most of my list was more around, and I'll just say this preemptively, was more around the operating and getting started standpoint as opposed to long-term investing, if that helps any. And I would put Novant and Atrium in that. They may be capable of doing long-term investing, but I don't, and obviously that doesn't, because I'm characterizing them as more for operational support, doesn't mean that they can't also be talked to about possible long-term support. But I want us to make sure that we get a plan done, and I don't want to quote muddy the water for any potential support by trying by double hitting them with both opportunities at the same time.
Oh, that makes sense. Got to be strategic in that aspect.
Right.
Now, when Tom Williams and I were meeting with Wake Forest and Novant a couple of years ago around the employer-assisted housing, the representative from Wake Forest did mention that they had, in his words, investable corpus that they could put towards projects,
right,
as a separate investment, and that there was some interest in that.
And they do. They do have that for sure.
And so he did express interest, and then there was COVID. So we really do need to revisit that conversation, because there was a lot of excitement around that, and asking us even in that moment, did we know of any good opportunities that would further the desires of the city, but also be beneficial to their employees and maybe help with their investment interest as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that same thing. So glad to hear that, because I was going to say the same thing, that both entities have investments, and they're part of their portfolio, and just wondering around how we help folks think differently around how they can still get returns for their investments, but be thoughtful about the public impact and helping create additional housing. So glad to hear that's one of the things that they already talked about. And that was Novant or Atrium or Health.
Well, it was Wake Forest who said they had the investable corpus, but then I also just remembered the mayor has been in conversations with the CEO of Atrium about coming to the table and supporting housing similar to what they're doing in Charlotte. So the mayor is having those conversations, and that is around a bigger, longer term investment. One of the things that, and this is just a little touch on the last item on the agenda, but one of the things that I think will be raised in the council's workshop on Monday is the idea of creating some kind of local housing trust fund. And so, that could be the place where folks like an Atrium or whomever could invest those dollars. Obviously we need an administrator to kind of manage the pool of funds and all of that, similar to what's happening in Charlotte with LISC. And not saying that we want to replicate the LISC model, because I understand there's some challenges with that, but looking at potentially creating a trust fund here for housing. And those folks whose doors we will be knocking on could put those investments in that place and have them flow from there. So I know the mayor is talking with Atrium about long-term investment. And there was also something else. Doc, it left me. Something else related to that I was going to mention, but I've forgotten it now. So I'll bring it up.
One thing, Marla, that just sparked for me, just in terms of with that, because we can go through that list of the hospitals there around the fund, and it's something just to check. And I don't want to speak too early around it, because the folks can spend the money before the end of the year. But one of the policy changes that happened with the city probably 5 or 6 years ago was a financial policy change around any surplus that the city has at the end of the year. That half of that was split to be split between economic development fund, and then the other half of that to go towards the finance assistance fund. And just knowing this year for sure, at least where things are moving now, that cities around the state right now are trending very high above in terms of tax receipts, particularly around sales tax, and potential likelihood of a surplus. That we keep that in mind. And I'm uncertain of the last few years, whether or not that has been maintained in terms of how those shifts may have been happening with resources being allocated as they should be to either one of those two funds at the end of each year. But it was only based upon if there was surplus, if you ended the city ended the year and there was surplus, how that was split between going to general fund balance and then what went to economic development and housing finance assistance.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that. I just remembered what I was going to mention earlier, and this is a question actually. You know, when we think about some of the parties, and I'll use the foundations as an example, could there be any value in a peer-to-peer conversation? So while New Orleans and South Louisiana had a number of foundations at the table who invested in their plan activities, would there be any interest in or value, you think, for a couple of those foundation folks to talk to our foundation folks to kind of help explain why it makes sense? I mean, obviously we need to make our case, but to hear from some of their peers how they were able to invest in housing as part of a larger strategy that might speak to some of their other investment and community objectives.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Particularly for folks who that's something new for them, or it's something that they hadn't done. I think it's probably always well to at least hear the good, bad, and ugly before you kind of move in that direction, but more so we want to share the good for sure. I don't know what others think.
Yeah, typically in the philanthropic community, peer-to-peer learning is always something that's welcomed by foundations, as you know, from what I've experienced. I think a lot depends on the foundations in Louisiana. If what they did fit within their what they call their strategic planning. If housing was something that they do on a regular basis, whether it was through Housing NOLA or any other aspect, that's one thing. If that's something that if it's something that is not in their strategic quiver, if you would, and if they went outside of their strategy to do that, it's not looked upon as with much favor as if it were a part of their strategic planning, if you would, or strategic initiatives, if you would. Say locally, I mean, we had the conversation in the last meeting, I believe. Locally, I don't know of any foundation here in Winston-Salem or Forsyth County that has housing as one of its strategic focuses. That was something we talked about at the trust for quite a while, but we never did put it down, particularly after, after 10 or 12 years ago, I think, well, no, probably 8 or 9 years ago when the CDCs kind of, basically didn't go, but there was collective or collaborative CDC funding up until about 7 or 8 years ago. And then it just got to be one-offs for organizations because they were de-emphasizing some of the work that the CDCs were doing. So I don't know if that would be as much, because it's not, I don't think the issue is how to do it locally. The issue is whether to use our resources for something that may not be in our strategic plan.
Right. And so, and primarily, because I remember we talked about this and how none of them were really in that space around housing. So I'm thinking about it in regard to the social determinants of health.
Well, that's what, again, you have to make, and that would be, particularly in the trust, I can't speak for the Winston-Salem Foundation, well, I can't speak for the foundation, I'm on their board, but that puts it more into more into play with the Winston-Salem, with the KB Reynolds Charitable Trust. Not sure how that would play with Z. Smith Reynolds or Mary Reynolds Babcock. But if you can make it a part of the social determinants of health, then obviously it fits within what the trust wants to do, and it's within a health perspective.
Okay.
I wonder if on that point, if we do engage with Housing New Orleans to help us put together this plan, on one of their early visits here to kind of help facilitate that process, whether that would be an opportunity to kind of set up something with the foundations and let Housing New Orleans explain a little bit about the role of foundations there in addressing some of these social issues that and economic issues that find their way into housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be helpful. And I actually know the president or CEO of the Foundation for Louisiana, which was one of the first foundations at the table for Housing NOLA. So, I would even be willing to reach out to him and even see if he could come to visit, maybe when the other folks come to visit, and just, introduce him to a few folks if you guys, think it might be helpful. Granted, that's a few months down the road potentially, but it was just something that occurred to me, because sometimes hearing from your peers who've walked that path can make a difference.
It can.
Okay. So I know I took us a little bit off track, but
that's helpful.
To me. Yeah.
That could be helpful.
Yeah, very much. Okay. Others we had here, just going down this list, we had Wake Forest University as one. Thoughts there? Was that similar in terms of I'll pause. Wake Forest?
I think Wake is interested in long-term. I think they're interested in long-term investment. Now, whether they go with something that the city is doing or something on their own is a question, but I think they're definitely interested in long-term affordable housing. And they may not be as apt to contribute to the operational part of it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm just thinking about the role that they have played in working with the Boston Thurman neighborhood.
Right.
And the, trying to think of the name of the program now.
Yeah.
You mean the program another program in addition to Boston Thurman?
Yeah, it's the one with the group from out of Atlanta.
No, it's purpose-built. You're talking about purpose-built communities.
Right. So that has that housing component.
Right.
So,
but they're interested in it for themselves as well, because of their faculty and staff housing that they have to be aware of.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're no stranger to housing.
That's for sure.
Not at all.
That's for sure.
But I think it's thoughtful even, and I know this is more about, and I would put in addition to Wake here, the Winston-Salem State University Foundation on there, and that because I know they are and have actively been looking at additional student housing needs and demands. Now, I don't know their interest in doing, but I know just recently, I know A&T just announced a pretty huge project they're doing through their foundation in Greensboro, where it's available for student housing, but they've approached it as a market development with some set asides in it. And so their foundation is kind of approaching their housing needs a little bit differently. And so I think that could just be an interesting thing in terms of talking through with some of them that have resources intended to go towards housing. How can we assist them in making, leveraging those resources greater to have a larger impact? Because I think both of those institutions' housing needs puts certain crunches on the year-round housing demands as well. Anything else on Wake Forest?
Mm-mm.
Okay, cool. Next up, City of Winston-Salem, and I think we saw Ryan jumped on. Ryan, we're just going through. We're still on the first 7 here. We're just walking through the list of potential funders and just giving some insight and commentary around who and how these folks may be able to bring some assistance and support to the work as a whole.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. City of Winston-Salem is up next on this.
I mean, I had that one down. Yeah, that was next. I had both the city and the county down just for obvious reasons kind of thing. But I don't know what their capacities are or capabilities around, you know, the operational funding. We know what goes along with that. So I had to set them down as obvious, and I thought anybody probably would have them both down as potential participants in one way or the other.
Agreed. And I checked the box on that one for both in terms of looking at, you know, both the short-term things we're looking at and even the long-term investment components of actually the building pieces of it.
Yeah.
Marla's got the checkbook.
Okay.
Well, I noticed from the paper this morning at their commissioners planning session yesterday, they were concerned about the turnover of employees. So getting involved in employer assisted housing might be one way to keep employees.
Good point, Paul. Good point.
Yeah, and we definitely know we have a number of city employees who need affordable housing. You know?
Right.
Well, it's the same thing that at least Atrium Wake Forest has recognized as well. I haven't heard Novant say as much about it, but Atrium is definitely on that track of you know, employee assisted housing.
Yeah. On the county side, any other thoughts there? I think from county participation, well, step back just real for me on the city side, just to think the normal resources and to be specific, you know, the conversations that I think the council may have around looking at, you know, bond referendums, I think is important. I think utilization and leverage of any other financing instruments that are available to the cities and localities, I think is important to talk about the long-term piece, such as your limited obligation bonds and those kind of things that I don't think we use. We haven't used anywhere here for affordable housing that I think is an interesting tool. And then not sure of conversation around even how they may fund, you know, the early work, but just one of those specific things, something I noted about ways from the city. And some of those apply also to the county if they were so inclined to use those same tools. Marla, to that, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say what we're finding with the county is not so much an appetite for actual housing investment as much as maybe partnering with the city around infrastructure. There's a real disconnect, I'll say, in terms of an appreciation of the role of affordable housing outside of the corporate limits of the city of Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
I think there's a perception that only the city has affordable housing needs, and therefore they don't see the city as its constituent when it comes to a lot of its resources. And they say if it's in Winston, then Winston needs to cover it, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, we pay taxes to the county. At any rate, we've had more fruitful conversations, though, around infrastructure investments. So, granted, you know,
It was all tags. That's all. They go down the Mooresville and Concord and any of those spaces to see that, you know, you don't have to be in the big city in order to see your housing prices and constraints, you know, rise. It's a rippling effect. So,
yeah,
what I was.
Well, and I think when you think about this from an advocate standpoint, you know, I think what could make a difference is who is actually bringing the message, right, to some of those commissioners. I definitely don't see that as something that staff has had much success with. And so I do think that some of the real opportunities to maybe change minds or hearts would have to come from folks in the community who are in influential positions. That's just my sense.
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to ask Marla on the Monday one, if that information can be shared with the county, if the council wants to may say, hey, we just got all this information from our folks, like we want to share this with the commissioners, because I think part of the issue there is some of the same issues that the council members have, just understanding, all of the layers of the housing piece. And so I don't know if that's something anybody's talked about, sending that over to the county.
Yes, so we've made staff aware, and I was sending actually a reminder today, and invite them to share that broadly with the manager's office as well as with the commissioners, in case they want to tune in on Monday to hear the presentations.
Sorry, Paul, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say the other thing to keep in mind as far as the county is, of course, they have land resources too. Of course, that the one a few months ago in East Winston that had the competing parties didn't work out and all that, but they have lots of land scattered around through properties they've acquired. So that they could bring that to the table as a resource where they don't actually have to put money on the table, but they've got land that they can contribute.
Yeah.
So going back to our original purpose and the categorizing, Derwin, I appreciate what Paul just said, and Marla as well. I don't think that we should look for the county to do anything on a short-term basis as far as funding operational support for a city committee, if you would, or city plan. That just wouldn't be practical to do. But I think more the long-term possibilities is what we're talking, particularly around the infrastructure that Marla mentioned, or the land use that Paul just talked about, kind of thing. I think we need to stay within what we know to be, I wouldn't say boundaries, because the boundaries overlap, but stay within the practical opportunities for them to help, I think would be a better way to approach the county.
Yeah, for sure. All right. They're dropping down. We have essentially the banking institutions, Wells Fargo, Truist Bank, Bank of America here. Thoughts? So we look at each one of those.
I'll just add, as it relates to Truist, we've got a new community development manager coming on board, I think, in the next week or so. So I'll share that information once he or she is onboarded. It's John Stokes' replacement, if anybody knew John. But they cover North Carolina, but would be also a great point of contact for something like this, as they have better line of sight into affordable housing.
You don't know who that's going to be yet, do you, Ryan?
We haven't announced the individual yet.
Yeah. But I think all of these, I don't know, Ryan could add to this, but I think all of the financial institutions that are listed here, and maybe others, might, I think if I could get coy, their preference would try to do something probably short term because it's cheaper if they want to contribute from their foundation to, a housing plan that's being developed, and not just a housing, but affordable housing plan that's being developed by the city. That would show that they've played, if you would. So they could do that from an operational support standpoint, to hire consultants or to put, plans together. I think more the long term would be, again, with what Ryan just talked about with this new, when they're community development area, that would be more the arm of the institution that does tax credit financing and possibly investing from a CRA standpoint. So they could play both of them. Just depends on what their appetite is and when it hits them.
I think that's well said, Joe. And most of the time, where I see these have the best success is when we hone in on an ask, and then you can figure out the right person in the institution for the
Exactly.
specific ask versus going and asking kind of generally, will you support this?
Right.
Because folks will say yes, but then, it's hard to find out who the right person to get the resources from is. There's probably a number of community banks that we could add to this list that aren't coming to mind immediately, but as we get a little bit deeper into this, we could look at adding.
Cool. All right, then the last one on the list now is Duke Energy. And thoughts on Duke Energy, is that from the foundation?
Yeah, I had them on my list, but again, because of the natural fit with energy, and I think they are showing some concern for housing as well, particularly energy efficient, affordable housing. So I like what Ryan just said. Depending on the ask for a Duke Energy, and Jimmy would have to make it fit from a local perspective. Jimmy Flight, who's there, at least unless it's changed, would have to make it fit from their foundation perspective if that's what we look for.
Got it. Yeah. Cool. Okay. The structured list there. Are there folks that are missing things, entities, and institutions that we think we want to ask? I know there are a couple that came out while we're talking that throughout there. Any others that we think we want to add to this list?
I feel like there's probably other businesses and corporate leaders that could come out, but with the chamber and the business alliance on here, that's probably where we may uncover some of that versus having to do it ourselves or figure it out today, so to speak.
Yeah. One other that's not here, and I have to pull one of my folks from there in another community, what they did. We don't have that full infrastructure. We have some of the pieces there for it, but I want to say it's in Michigan. It's what they did. An association. I want to say it was religious institutions. Actually, it was a faith-based alliance, in which they used some resources that they would have had invested in different ways in terms of they would have had invested in stocks and bonds that they used and leveraged to be invested in the creation of affordable housing. Like I said, we don't have we have a couple different ministries conferences, those kind of things, but we don't have a true kind of like faith-based alliance that brings together folks that way. But I think we do have some pretty significant faith-based institutions in our community that something like this, I think, could be interesting to talk with some of them about, and figuring out maybe that's a roundtable of some sort we want to create to start sowing some seeds in that area.
Another group I could think about, not so much as an investor on either the operational or the building side, but more of a technical assistance, maybe making connections with potential people is the Home Builders Association. They might be able to give some kind of technical assistance on how to get certain types of housing done. I don't know how much they dip their toes into the multifamily housing, whether they're mostly single family, but I think they'd be a good resource. And John Louder, who's not with us at the meeting today, but he might be able to make some suggestions about apartment builders, developers on that.
Yeah.
What you just mentioned, Paul, reminded me of another potential player. Might be a little more challenging here because we don't really have unions, but the AFL-CIO has a housing trust. And they do big investments in other places around the country. I serve on a national board with a gentleman who had worked with their trust until about a year or so ago. He's now with the National Housing Foundation, and they have some projects here in North Carolina. And I did mention to him, that there might be a need for him to come and take a look at Winston, because they're repositioning some properties in Charlotte as well as in the Raleigh area. But he could be a good resource in terms of information about the AFL-CIO trust. So I'll just have to kind of remember to tap him at the appropriate time.
Others thoughts here? And I think it's a pretty, robust list, and I think part of us what's kind of sticking out the kind of what to ask. I think pretty good here. We could do this now, or we could maybe if we reframe that list that we have there, and if folks wanted to offer thoughts on who should make asks to individual groups, I think that may be a good way kind of signing up or suggesting. Some of these I think come outside of this group. I think in terms of ask, I think some of this is some strategic engagement at higher levels with some of these individuals. If there's recommendations that come from our group, I think that there should be people such as the mayor and some of the elected bodies who are helping them to corral and pull together these groups to be clear that it's a true commitment and a request associated with whatever fund or resources we have here. In particular, because of the fact that for 5 or 6 years now, the number one strategic priority for the city has been housing. And I think so those things kind of align with making requests. And even if some of these are kind of warm handoffs to some other individuals, I'm uncertain of how many of the requests are things that we make ourselves from the Affordable Housing Coalition and how much may come from other entities. But there's just my thought on who makes the ask. But I'll pause there and see if there are other thoughts folks have.
Sure, and I think that's a great point. I was just thinking about the influence of the mayor, and a good number of these organizations on the list here. I could see the mayor either approaching them in groups or individually or whatever, and it having a lot of weight behind it with him asking that.
Yeah, I like that too, Paul, and I want to make sure. Let me make sure I haven't missed something in what our next steps might be as far as these individuals. I thought at our last meeting we talked about having a small gathering, again to Paul's point, of a small group, 10, 12, 15, whatever. I call it small instead of 5 or 6, but to make these stakeholders aware of this initiative and what we're looking to do, and make sure they know what's going on, first of all, before we start asking them, what role can you play or can you help with this particular part of it? Because I think informing them and educating them on, they probably have heard bits and pieces, sound bites about the needs kind of thing, but I don't know that either one of them individually has had a sit down with anybody to say, what do you mean by this? Or what, how do you know this is so to have that full discussion. And I think the mayor, along with support people, whether it's you, Duran, and Marla with them, I don't expect the mayor to do this by himself. And then maybe 1 or 2 of us from the coalition to be a part of that meeting, or more of us for that matter. But anyway, I was envisioning a kind of gathering to put the idea and what we're doing out there for them to get a more intimate feel for what might be going on in the next 4 or 5 years, instead of going individually. It's also more efficient too.
I agree. I like that. I do believe that's something we had talked through before about doing something of that nature. And for me, in terms of kind of throwing the mayor out there in that sense, I just think I made that suggestion just in the sense that, we got all these kind of groups and commissions and coalitions out here, but to truly show that this is really something that folks are really get behind and really actually going to move in a direction, was thinking about being able to have some of those players so that folks could really clearly see kind of where things were going. And if we can figure out where and how we play those support roles, as you mentioned, and kind of getting, and maybe it's us facilitating getting them things in place, and we just have, bringing the mayor and these other folks in to make sure that they're able to talk in space. So, yeah. And as well as, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, who chairs the, Housing General Government Committee, that kind of facilitating a lot of this conversation. So,
No, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I think if these organizations see the leadership of the city pushing this, that will carry a lot further than well, here's the housing coalition and they're saying this is a need in the community, and you're not going to get the kind of reaction that you would with the leadership of the city pushing that. So.
Yeah.
And Marla, I'm just wondering, with the conversation that's happening on Monday, how this piece may potentially connect with any outcomes or intended outcomes with that, or do you see this kind of separate? I'm just thinking about if we're thinking about next steps on this, if saying, hey, we want to try to organize something like this, is that notwithstanding this conversation on Monday that they're from the council side?
I think it just further amplifies what is probably going to take place on Monday.
Okay.
Because I do think that, there'll be a charge to council to, basically go on the record committing or recommitting to affordable housing, and, probably something around, well, I think one of the things that may come up, although it'll need to be on the council agenda for March, is the formal commitment of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars for affordable housing. I think that's going to be formalized in March. And then I think that, and kind of dovetailing some of what we've talked about here with the plan, is, raising the conversation around setting goals for housing production annually. So I can actually see that as something that may also bubble up in Monday's conversation. And like I said, that kind of dovetails our conversation. And, there is an item on the agenda about, let's see here. I've got like 20 copies of the agenda that I'm working on. Talking about implementation, like developing an implementation strategy for how we'll get to addressing all those units that we need. And the implementation strategy, I think, you can look at it from two perspectives. One is creating that housing plan, because that's really clear on what the strategies are going to be, annual targets, and so forth. So that kind of dovetails with that. The other piece is, and Paul, you'll find this interesting. So our first presenter on Monday will be Mitch Silver. And Mitch shared that our legacy plan is just great. He told me about the award it won and so forth. And so knowing that this year is the year to do an update to the plan, he suggested that as part of that update, that an implementation piece be added to it, which could then dovetail, complement, integrate with what we're talking about on the housing plan side, right? And they kind of come together. So if you've got planning and development services, updating legacy, and building in an implementation plan, we're feeding this information that would be a good part of that implementation plan. I think that we'll be on a path, because that's what council is going to hear, is that we've got this great comprehensive plan. Time to go ahead and do an implementation piece to it. The coalition's talking about doing an implementation plan. We're just, everything's kind of coming together.
Yeah, I like that connection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you'll hear that. And again, it will be Monday. I'm jumping ahead again to that part of the agenda, from 4 to 7, and it'll be on TV 13. So you'll get to hear it.
I'm sorry, and that was, but since Duran kept talking about Monday, I was going to ask, because I'm not familiar with Monday's meeting. I saw that on the agenda, but I'll wait until I get there, because I wanted to understand what was going to take place on Monday. But I'll wait until we get there.
Okay. So just a little update on that.
Marla, you referenced the commitment to use ARPA dollars for housing in March, I think. What Can you just share a little bit more about what that will look like? Is that just a general commitment, or will there be like an allocation to specific things? Is there involvement that we should have in making recommendations or something there? Like, I'm just curious
Right now,
learn a little bit more.
yeah, from what I understand at this moment, it is just simply the commitment to allocate $20 million to housing. So they will formally commit 20 million to affordable housing. Now, how that's going to roll out is part of what we're talking about now. Is, how much would be for incentives, for just hard, cash, or all of those details. We're not there yet, but I think it starts with council saying, yes, we will take 20 million of our opera dollars and set them aside for affordable housing.
Marla, is any of that going toward the creation of the plan, or is there separate funding that's going toward creating the plan?
Right now, that looks like just housing.
Mhm.
I think anything around plan creation, I will probably have to figure that out differently or separately. But I think right now they're looking at dollars for preservation and development, first and foremost. Because the notion of the plan in and of itself isn't something that they've had a lot of information on yet, because we're kind of, gearing up. So I'm going to make mention of it. I think Mitch will kind of set the stage for that to some extent as he talks about legacy and the implementation plan, which again complements what we're talking about. So he'll tee it up. I'm going to reiterate it in the third phase, because we have three different general buckets of this meeting. One will be led by Mitch Silver. That's first. Then we'll have a segment that's done by Tyler Mulligan and Sarah Odio from the School of Government. And then I will do a short piece on the need for the implementation plan and funding and financing opportunities, getting the private sector involved in the work. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. And then I'll also talk about what are some of the near-term opportunities that we have, around action. So I'll be going through a list of some of the development stuff that we are trying to tee up over the next 60 to 180 days. So we'll talk about some of that. So they'll know that we're actually working on stuff, because sometimes, until you get to the point of the ribbon cutting or the groundbreaking, it may seem as though nothing's happening, but in actuality, we have our hands in about 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4, maybe 5 items. Mm-hmm. We're about to close on the purchase of that 5.3 acres on Peters Creek. And so, and we're talking with the Development Finance Institute about providing us with the TA that we need to get some of these projects moving. And, the TA they provide can take us all the way up to the request for proposal stage. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are actively looking at how we get projects off the ground. We've got the Ridgewood development. We've got the Northwest Boulevard development, which is permanent supportive housing. We've got the 5.3 acres on Peters Creek Parkway. Let me see. We are looking to acquire a small hotel, motel, or apartment complex for permanent housing. So we've got things in the mix. It's just not obvious to folks because it's just the day-to-day stuff that we do. But we're going to make them aware of that, as well as our intent to partner with the Development Finance Institute.
Marla, are you planning at all to talk about what some of the other cities in North Carolina have done to leverage and bring more private investment in? I'm thinking about like what Self-Help is doing in Durham and Raleigh, what LISC has done in Charlotte to use some of those public funds and philanthropic dollars to raise additional capital. I mean, first thing that came to mind when you said that the ARPA dollars was, could we use some of those dollars to leverage bringing, some of the financial and corporate institutions in to create a larger fund for gap financing and things of that nature. That's what we're seeing in some other communities.
Yeah, that's the intent. Now, I won't do a lot of the talking on that point. That's part of what Tyler and his team may talk about and Mitch may touch on. My speaking piece is very short, like maybe 10 minutes. So, and I just kind of gave you everything that I'll be talking about just then. So, and let me mention this too. I don't believe that this is a one and done kind of meeting with the council, that this is just the first, but, and they wanted to kind of keep some of it at a higher level and not get too far in the weeds. I know in our planning session with the mayor pro tem and others, we talked about some of the other models. I expect that some of that will be discussed by, again, both Tyler Mulligan, as well as maybe to a lesser extent, Mitch Silver. But we have, as a working group, talked about some of those examples, which is why I'm saying that, and they have also said this is not a one and done kind of meeting with the council. This is kind of to set the stage and get the work started.
Okay. Yeah, I'd just hate to lose the opportunity while those funds are available to attract some more partners.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why there's going to be some discussion around a trust fund, because those dollars could be part of what we could use to attract additional investments in the trust fund. And we're mindful of the deadlines for getting that money spent, no doubt, and that's part of the reason why we thought we would let them know we have a number of projects already, in the hopper, and we'll be looking to certainly issue some other requests for proposals for other projects. But these are in the next 60 to 180 days. Certainly, I could see after that time frame, there be some other opportunities, especially if we continue to do some land acquisition as we're hoping to do. We would like to turn right around and put it out for development.
Yeah. Cool. All right. To move, I think we hit on a couple areas in this the remainder of the agenda here, in terms of some of the use of the city funds on some things here, but want to go into this, just the housing NOLA proposal. In the process to obtain technical assistance. I think it comes to just some of the same thing we're talking about, the resources. And so just to be more specific there, Marla, what are we in a place yet of that request? Because I know when I think Patrice was in some of these, they're talking about facilitating a request or something like that to around whatever technical assistance we needed to start this. So I guess maybe just a sense of where we stand in that process.
So I'm waiting on the actual formal proposal from Housing NOLA. I think previously they'd kind of given us like a framework, but I've asked that they actually kind of give us more of what an action plan would look like and the cost. So I'm waiting to get that. I have identified some preliminary dollars to hopefully get us started. What I'll need to get a better sense of is how much it will cost with Housing NOLA to then figure out, do we have enough with what I've identified, or is it a situation where, we'll put in the amount that we can put in, but we'll have to do a little fundraising to make up the balance of it. So that's the big question now. Hopefully I'll get that proposal within the next week or so. And I did an outreach yesterday just saying, we were meeting today and I really needed to kind of get that thing moving. It's just been a wild start of the year for a lot of folks. And so things haven't moved as quickly as I know I have hoped, even in terms of some of the work that we're doing here in our office. So I did just remind them that we're needing the proposal, and hopefully we'll get that soon. But I think we're ready as soon as we know the cost. Then, I will share that with you all right away. And then, because then at that point, I can tell you how much the city can cover.
Got it. And I guess one question I have there from Marla, and do we see this, thinking about, I know you're saying about maybe having to go out fundraise or get resources from another space to get things started. Is that a sense of trying to, from the beginning, have this more community funded than just city funded? Or, because, I think the city, unless they come with some real crazy number, should have capacity to try to fund, kind of get things started. But if the intention is trying to say, okay, we want to start this from the very, very beginning, with the diversity of folks at the table, funding so they feel tied to it or invested, is that the sense? Or is it more just kind of looking at what resources you want to apply to this?
So I'm thinking of it in the sense of a collaborative funding method. I see the city maybe trying to take on getting the TA provider in place. But if we're going to do a model similar to Housing NOLA, where we honor and appreciate the time of community and the work that they'll put in, such that they will be paid for some of the work and things like that, I see that as a role for the broader community, philanthropy, and whomever else to help support that part of plan creation. So I kind of see this as the collaborative funding. We get the TA provider in place, but some of those other costs, not to say we wouldn't help anything else, but first and foremost, I see us trying to bring the TA provider to the table. And then we work with community to get those other funds that help support the community work.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. Other thoughts, remarks from folks on this? All right,
I think that's where the conversation that Joe was talking about with the mayor and a broader group becomes really important, so that we've got some line of sight to that not becoming, a one and done thing that the city funds and then it goes dormant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. So looking at the time, I think that when we look at the proposals and how that moves, figuring out how to align, starting that, kind of figuring out getting that group set up to start that conversation. Knowing such a proposal is being prepared in terms of the RFP, their proposal on how they would do the work is forthcoming. So yeah, okay. All right, moving on down here to action steps and plan in terms of just inquiry here in terms of what groundwork can Affordable Housing Coalition members lay pending formal start a housing plan. What do we see our role? Kind of what kind of foundational work can we be engaged in helping as in this interim space? Do we have thoughts on some of that work we can be doing in the interim? I have one, but just pause it. The only piece that I have thought on here in terms of some of our work is just going back to some of the specifics of the initial charter from the council and figuring out how to incorporate that into our ongoing work. And in particular, it's the space of the recommendations around use of resources and funds, just being able to kind of leverage the folks here at this kind of like, as you think about the proposals or even the ARPA funds or these things and projects that come through, how do we position or integrate that conversation into our normal kind of meeting schedules to say, okay, this project is coming forward or these resources are looked to be used in this area, so that there can be some of that dialogue added to the council's consideration, so they can see affordable housing, review this. These are some of their thoughts on, how these funds could be used, and some recommendations that may have come from the coalition. That's one area that I think in terms of helping in some of this in place.
Doran, that gets me to thinking it might be good, Marla a few minutes ago kind of pointed out a number of projects that she and the city are in the middle of supporting and getting going and all that. It might be good just to kind of start what you're talking about going, is to maybe take a session and have Marla or others kind of go through each of those projects and what kind of project is it? What's the target group that it's looking to serve? And if we learn more about those, that might help us kind of focus our attention on, okay, what else is missing? What more is needed in terms of future projects? So when those projects come forward, we can be a little more engaged on those.
Yeah. Agree. Other thoughts around?
And we can definitely give you a synopsis or outline of the individual projects for the next meeting. And probably just to put it in a document and share ahead of time. So you'll have an opportunity to kind of read it and then maybe have some specific questions you can ask at the next meeting.
And not just on those projects, I guess in the same in terms as we look at just some of the resource recommendations. So like even like at the just the helpfulness of like to the council of, okay, there are dollars out there and they're likely to make an appropriation that we have, again, whether it's a formal move of this coalition or others on saying, hey, we support that, or again, but leaning into that space that's in the charter around the making some recommendations and giving advice to the council around the use of resources.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I want the council to do, to look at this group as, which I know that they've gotten some recommendations, but to kind of start to look to the coalition more regularly to around the housing conversation itself as in general, from resource to action, just that we really do play a vital role in that process of their consideration.
I like that.
Okay.
Anybody else in your thoughts there? And the other piece is just in terms of how will this be coordinated? I'll come back. I know we've thrown your name up there a lot, Marla. I said, Marla can do that. I said, well, how are you coming on your staff? We're giving you work, Marla, but we don't want to, understand how you have a lot already on your plate that you got going. So.
Yeah, and we're still a little ways from bringing some folks on board. Structurally, you know how the city operates, and so with key other positions unfilled that are necessary to kind of support the rest of us in the stuff that we're doing, it's creating a little log jam. But my hope is, we're in March. My hope is sometime in April, we might be there. I know we'll need to be there because I do have some other, like all of these projects that I'm going to need to get moving. So it's a slow process. It's a slow process.
And to that end, I guess it's the question of to us as members in this work in terms of, are there things that we could be continuing to do that helps us move along, that doesn't put this all on you and the staff? And if so, what are some of those things, if you have thoughts about that?
Well, certainly I think one thing that'll be really helpful is identifying who you would want to be in that initial conversation, that small gathering that Joe spoke about. Who might those 10 to 15 people be? to start identifying who that is, and then certainly, what the ask is of the mayor in terms of being a part of that meeting. I think starting to have that conversation and get some clarity around that would be huge, because that moves a big part of the conversation, right? So I see that as probably one of the biggest. Certainly, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to ask a clarification on that, what you just said. So is the who you're talking about, or are the who from the organization's perspective, or from our internal committee and city perspective? Which one are you talking about as far as who needs to be included? I wanted to make sure, because I put some possible contacts on the ones that I submitted, and those are possible. For instance, Ryan, I had Canty down, but it may not be Canty Alexander from Truist. It may be somebody else. I was just putting names down that I knew, with you being on the committee kind of thing. So, but again, I didn't know if you were talking about internal people, or you're talking about those that are going to be invited.
Yeah, I'm thinking the invited folks. So when you had mentioned having that small gathering,
right.
Of folks, yeah, I'm thinking about that group. Who will they be? Maybe going on and compiling that list, and then who, what it is we would want to ask the mayor to do as part of that gathering, and things of that nature, I think would be a big role. I can have us go back, update that spreadsheet to add some columns that say short-term, long-term, put some of the notes in that I've jotted down based on your conversation, to kind of give us a more useful tool with this information that we've discussed. And then, having some of those notes now in front of you could be helpful in identifying gaps, who might be missing, that maybe wasn't even obvious in today's discussion, but once you kind of see that list in writing there, it might trigger some additional thoughts, some of like we've had this morning. And I do know that we didn't talk about the lead community organizations, but maybe that could be next time, because I think that is going to be a bigger lift for us, quite frankly. And I think on that, we only had the United Way, Winston-Salem Foundation, and Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods were the three names that had been provided. So I think that's going to take more time.
That was the one we talked about, a lead community. That was in terms of like somewhere where the work could live, some work. Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's going to take some more work. But in the short term, as it relates to funding the work, short term and potentially long term, we can update that part of the spreadsheet and keep that as a running tool. And because it could grow to who's going to contact, are they going to be in the initial gathering, so we can capture a lot of information. So we'll, like I said, update that spreadsheet. But I think probably looking at that, who all needs to be at the table, how we're going to do that initial information session to let folks know what's going on. I think those are probably the biggest areas for right now. And while we continue to work on getting the proposal and some of the other stuff in place.
Okay.
Marla, can I ask a quick question on the gathering? Will we have a sense of budget requirements when we have that meeting or not? Or what money we would need?
I think we should have it.
We should. I was going to say we should, if that would be, because I would think it would be pointless to do that without them having some knowledge or expectation of what they're being told about.
Right. Yeah, because I think you've got two sets of numbers, right? You've got the initial operational plan creation investment. Then you've got, okay, what kind of investment are you going to put into the pool? I'll
Mhm.
call it a pool for now, for the long-term development. So I think it'll be pretty easy to come up with what it might cost to fund creating the plan.
Right.
From the long-term investment, I think then it gets into what is
Right.
the appetite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think short term would be a lot more, specific than the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And to the end of the just kind of the broader the conversation around the work, the institutions, that stuff, that may be well for us to have that as a agenda item for us to kind of talk through, and then from there coming back and just some of this interim work kind of coming back to just kind of say, okay, do we feel and these folks have any capacity? Have we talked to them? Who do we need to have some of this same kind of small conversation with any of these groups or organizations, or do we think there needs to be some other kind of collaborative work or something new, even to hold the work? I think is something worthwhile to have just as a specific point of our conversation. Only one I'll add to that list be SG Atkins. That'd be an interesting conversation there around them. Just for the level of work they've been engaged with in some of their capacity.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, because I may have missed the first part of your comment. So for the agenda for next time, having a more conversation around potential lead organizations.
Yeah, just some of that place for us in terms of that interim, so what we can be doing in between the start of the plan. I think having some of that conversation, I think, would be worthwhile.
Okay.
And with any of these, I don't know if it part of it is who we think, and even if we think they have it, comes back to, are they even interested in serving in some of those roles, even if they had capacity. So being just to talk through that, because I think that conversation is going to be similar to the conversation with some of the funders as well, in the sense of their capacity, their willingness, if it is an existing organization kind of thing.
Okay.
What are we asking them to do? Okay. With that, I think we already, unless we need to run, Joe, I don't know if you, I think Marla kind of went through the agenda for the Monday meeting, kind of those points. I don't know if there was some more to go through that or not.
Well, let me just say real quickly, if Marla, this is Mitch Silver. If it's the Mitch Silver I'm thinking of, that's a big deal to have him come to the meeting. Former planning director of Raleigh, former American Planning Association president, currently the president of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and in between that, he was commissioner of Parks and Recreation for New York City. So he's done some pretty groundbreaking work, and he is an excellent speaker. So that's going to be a treat to have him there. So,
that's him, and he's back. He's in Raleigh. He's with McAdams, so he's back in the state. So we're glad to have him back here. Yeah. So he's good for teeing things up. I know Joe's getting ready to leave us.
Yeah. He's spoken in Winston-Salem a couple of times before, but that's a real coup to get him here. So
yeah.
Okay, guys, I got to jump off. I got another meeting at 12 o'clock to get to. I think I had told Marla about that in you, Duran. So next meeting, I guess, unless there's something between, and I'll try to, I've got a conflict Monday. I'll be out of town, but I'll maybe record that session because I'd like to hear the how. Will it be recorded, by the way, for later review?
It will. Yeah, it'll be on the city's YouTube channel. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we're pretty much at the end of the agenda. Unless I have it. Paul, I think you signed in. I don't know if you have anything to add or.
No, thank you, Darren. I don't like to add anything when I'm late. So.
Listen, some that might be some of the most groundbreaking thoughts could come in.
No, yeah. I'll save it to the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts for the good of the order? Marla, anything from your end?
No, I think I'm good. I think I'm good.
Okay, well, we'll give everybody 29 minutes back on their schedule.
All right then. Well, thank you all. Have a great weekend, and please tune in Monday if you can.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you all
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the
now.
tournament.
Thanks, y'all.